Michelle, it must have been pretty much just about 3 months ago. We were lucky enough to be at Destination D23. And while we were there, we saw and witnessed a lot of fantastic things, lots of park announcements, different stuff from different things that are coming to the Walt Disney Company. But the one thing that I think you agree stopped us in our tracks happened on Sunday morning when our guests today came out and presented this wonderful little short that we knew nothing about, but were absolutely blown away by.
Oh, yeah. That's an understatement. I think I remember we did a short clip that night for the podcast. And I think I remember saying it was the best piece of work I've ever seen on a screen in my life.
Yeah, we had to stop that. Like, we told everybody, like, wait, we're going to have to check what we would normally talk about on this show, recapping the day's activities, because we need to focus about half of it just on this short alone. And that's without telling anybody about it. But now it's been out for a couple months. We can talk all about it. And boy, are we lucky today to welcome aboard the co-creators, the co-directors of Once Upon a Studio, Dan Abraham and Trent Correy. Guys, welcome to the Hyperion Adventures podcast.
Hey, Tom and Michelle, good to be here.
Thank you so much. My gosh, that lead-in was wow, amazing.
I know you were so nice, Tom, and then Michelle, you were like, and he's understating. I'm like, what? There's more. Thank you so much. So nice.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm in a pinch me moment right now, being able to see you all and talk to you. This is just a dream come true for us. So
yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah.
So if you don't know who Dan and Trent are, they've been working for the Disney animation department for a long time. They've done a lot of work. They've worked on a lot of the movies you love. Dan's worked on Encanto, Wish, which just came out not that long ago. He's worked on the Tinkerbell movies. Trent's worked on Moana, Raya and the Last Dragon, Zootopia, Big Hero 6. Trent, you've worked on Frozen and Frozen 2. If this is another interview, we may just sit here and talk to you about that, because hashtag real men love Frozen on this show. But we're here to talk about some of the other stuff that you did. And most importantly, this wonderful, beautiful piece of art, Once Upon a Studio, right, Michelle?
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's get to it. Guys, let's start off with kind of how you got into this whole thing. What drew you to working in animation, and eventually how did you both end up with the Walt Disney Company?
Okay. I have no other skills in life beyond sort of being able to draw. And so since I was little, the goal was always to work at Disney Animation. Back in the day, there weren't a lot of animated movies out there from other studios. Disney was sort of the top dog. And so when I was little and I would go to the theater with my mom and we saw, Lady and the Tramp, a reissue of Lady and the Tramp, or the Aristocats or Fox and the Hound, those movies, like, they affected me, animation and cartoons, Saturday morning cartoons, all that stuff. Disney animated movies were on a whole other level with their sort of sophistication and grace of beauty of animation and color and music, and they became part of my DNA. And I had to work for Disney someday. And so I've been here almost 20 years now, and I still pinch myself every day that I get to be here and work with these people that are just so wildly talented and inspiring, and what an absolute thrill. But after high school, I went to Sheridan College for animation, like always with the sights set on Disney. And it took me a while, but I did finally get here. And it's a dream come true. What can I tell you?
Nice.
Yeah, and Dan's not lying. He's got fresh pixie dust on his shoulders every morning he walks in. Gotta brush it off. Yeah, and I grew up in Ottawa, Canada, and when I was younger, animation wasn't really on my radar as much as Dan was saying, but I loved film and I loved movies, and I grew up during the 90s, the Renaissance, the great Disney films, Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast. So I loved animation, but in high school, I got into this film course. There was just one passionate teacher named Mr. Leduc. Shout out to him. We're good buddies still. And he taught a film class, and I loved just going around with the camera, making movies. And it kind of got me through high school. It gave me something really passionate to sink my teeth into. And my mom's an artist, so she always encouraged me to draw. And then finally, right at grade 12, when I had really no idea what I was going to do, my film teacher connected, hey, live action with you like to draw, and introduced the idea of animation to me. So I went to Algonquin College in Canada for a couple of years, started working in TV and commercials, and very quickly, same as Dan, just like Disney was my North Star in college. I was like, I want to work for Disney, no other company. I wanted to work for Disney for whatever reason, because growing up with the movies and it being such a magical thing. And I applied for years, 3 times a year, every 4 months, I'd submit online, never heard back for about 3 or 4 years, and then finally got feedback on one of my submissions. And then the next time I got accepted into a training program, year 5 of applying, and the Disney has this great training program where they fly you down here. It was called the Talent Development Program at the time, and now the Apprentice Program. And they fly you down here and move you for 6 months, and you train and you work under a Disney veteran. So I had a mentor named Amy Smead, who's been here 20 plus years. And they just teach you the Disney way for 6 months. So I came down to do that with kind of no promise of it extending. And at the end of the 6 months, Frozen was just starting. And, nobody knew inside the studio what we had with that film. And I was like, oh, I guess I'll work on this Frozen movie. And the first character I animated was Olaf. And the first movie I worked on was Frozen. I just feel so lucky that the time in that training program aligned with the movie Frozen.
Very cool. Very cool. So
Yes.
you mentioned Olaf there. So we need to talk about a little bit about, before we get into Once Upon a Studio, we will definitely get into that a lot. But before that, we need to talk a little bit about something else you two worked on together. That's the short Once Upon a Snowman featuring Olaf. If you haven't seen it yet on Disney Plus, check it out. It's a great little story. It takes place kind of in the middle of the original Frozen movie. How did it come about that you guys got involved with that film?
Yeah, well, I can say, Dan, are you cool if I segue into that?
Go for it.
From Frozen? Yeah, because it all, I'm right with you, Tom. Real men love Frozen. I'll hop on that hashtag wagon. So I bring this up because I when I was in the training program and started on Frozen, I started in the crowds department. That's the typical way you move into the animation department. So I was a CG animator, and you animate background characters in the movie. So I started working on Frozen, animating the people of Arendelle in the background, people waving and walking and all that sort of thing. And during that time, those 3 months of crowds animation, the team was working on Let It Go. And I could see scenes popping up on our computers and go to dailies and watch scenes. And it's a beautiful song. And there's a scene where Elsa walks and she creates Olaf in the song. And then she just keeps walking and singing. And I was watching this at my desk thinking, this is, over 10 years ago now, and thinking, wow, like the internet, they're going to go wild. She created life, and then she just kept walking, and we don't see Olaf for another 20 minutes. So 10 years ago, this in 2011, I was sitting at my desk drawing an Olaf origin story of Olaf coming to life in that moment and meeting up with Kristoff, Anna, and Sven later on and getting his carrot nose. So when I brought now years later, I think in 2000, was it 2020, Dan, or 19? That
19.
So 2019, Disney Plus was just getting started, and Jen Lee, our chief creative officer here, had said to the studio, like, we're going to start working on content. And I'd been sitting on this Olaf short for years, and I had done little beat boards. I had written a little script. And I just had this idea that I'm like, well, maybe one day somewhere in the studio, there will be a place to pitch this. And Jen said, we're taking ideas. If anyone has ideas, let me know. And I stopped Jen in the hallway one day and said, hey, I have this idea for Olaf, a little Olaf origin story. And at the time I was working on Frozen 2 as the Olaf supervisor. So I was really connected with the character. And she said, okay, let me hear the pitch. And I pitched it to her. And then Dan, I want to hear it from your side here, because Jen, she liked the pitch and she said, let me think about it. And then it goes to Dan.
Well, I was also working on Frozen 2 at the time. I storyboarded the Olaf song, and I was working on Gale, the character of Gale, the Wind Spirit. And Trent was also working on Gale. And so that's where we sort of met, was on Frozen 2, because I was storyboarding and he was animating the same characters. And so we would kind of, what do you, how are you approaching this? What are you looking at? All that kind of thing. So we met there, but then one day I got a call to Jen's office, and she said, hey, Trent Correy pitched this really wonderful Olaf idea, and Trent has risen up the ranks through the animation department, but he hasn't really tackled story full on before, and we would love to know if you'd be interested in helping him story wise, like, help co-direct this thing with Trent. And I said, oh, that guy, yeah, sure, and so the two of us, it was amazing, because Trent had all these little sketches and things in a little book about what this could be. And he was just so open to, he's like, take this. He pitched me what he had, and he's like, take this, take a week or whatever you want to do, and just like rework it and see if there's things you want to add to it or throw out, or if they're just, we want to make this thing stronger. He was just so open to any ideas. And so yeah, I took a bit of time, and I reworked some things, and I threw in a lot of what if this and what if that, and he was so receptive and felt that it had strengthened what good idea he already had. And so then we would go, and then he would say, oh, if we do that, then we could do this thing. And I was like, yeah, and then this. So it really became such a fun project, because with his animation brain and my story brain, we wanted the same things, but we came at them from different angles, and we had a ball working on that, and it was so much fun. We just had a great time.
And like Dan said, it was kind of like instant getting in the story room. When he came back and pitched the ideas, we realized, like, oh yeah, we're both after the same. We have the same sensibilities, same kind of like tone and humor and all that sort of stuff. But like Dan mentioned, we come at it from two totally different departments, and it was just, I feel like it worked right away. It was the perfect marriage right away, that we just had this fun back and forth and play.
Well, I think you'd agree with me, Michelle. It really worked. Like the fun, you can see the fun they had in it, because it comes out in that short, right?
Oh, definitely. And it's the storytelling in there is just so rich, because like you said, you're filling in some gaps here too, but you're also giving nods to the original storyline as well. It was such a creative way to bring that story together.
Oh,
thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and we did have our discussions in there, right, Dan? I went into it pitching, if you've seen the short, he has a sausage nose in the short. That's his nose.
Oh.
But I was pretty adamant, hey, Dan, about having the original concept. He had a dead fish as a nose. He had a fish, and in my pitch to Jen, it was my cover image. I was very confident about having this little fish be his nose, and Dan came in, and that was the first thing he jumped on.
I said, Trent had done this like run cycle of Olaf with the fish flopping around on his face, and it was disturbing. I think it was, I'm gonna just say it was disturbing, but I said, the fact that Olaf is going to be chased by wolves, they're chasing him to get that fish, and I said, the story math there is, if Olaf were being chased by cats, it's like you associate cats with wanting food or wanting fish. And I said, since it's wolves, to me, it meat, like and I thought of the summer sausage. And so it to me, that story math just adds up better. And so you just have these discussions back and forth, and eventually Trent came around, and it was
it took some time, but eventually the summer sausage became kind of like a theme for us. When we would show the short in different cuts to Jennifer Lee, we'd lay out a platter of summer sausage and crackers, and even Dan, when we final shots and dailies, we had a little squeaky sausage, which meant your shot got finaled. So it eventually became the theme of the short.
Yeah.
It's great because it's like it just feels like a dad joke, almost like what kind of sausage would Olaf like? Of course, summer sausage. Just
Right,
is
right.
great. That short
Yeah.
is brilliant.
Yeah.
So good. So,
Thank
yeah. Thank you so much for putting it together. So you got done with that. And you kind of separated and went off and to do other projects. I know, Trent, you worked on the Zootopia Plus series, which was great.
Yeah.
Dan, you were working on Baymax, exclamation point. You directed one of the episodes there, another great series. But it seems like there was something else in the background you guys were percolating right about that time. Might have something we're talking about right now.
Well, we were having separation anxiety. Like we had such a good time on Once Upon a Snowman, and then when we went our separate ways and we were working on other stuff, and we're like, how do we work together again? Like, how do we, because we're in, now we're directing two different things, um and so we thought, well, why let's think of a pitch. Let's think of something that we could do together again. And we realized, this was a couple years ago now, we realized that the 100th anniversary of Disney animation was coming up in a couple years, and we were both so beside ourselves, that we were going to be working at the studio at that time. And how cool is that, like during that anniversary and that milestone? And we thought, well, why don't we put together something that celebrates that? The studio was already working on Wish, and that was sort of going to celebrate sort of the overall themes of our films and moving forward and things, but it was going to be all original characters, and so we thought, well, why don't we do something that really pays tribute to the characters, the legacy of the studio, all of the artists that have, and so when we started talking like that, it's like, wow, that's a big thing to take on in a short. But Trent and I worked for about 8 months in private at night and on weekends. We were being very, very secret and wasn't telling anybody what we were doing. But we just kept spitballing back and forth again.
It was such a fun time too, because it was the height of COVID. This is January 2021, right, Dan? That we started. I'm always lousy on the math here.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's
January 2021. So we're kind of mid COVID, and like Dan mentioned, we didn't set out of the gate to make 100-year short. We got together just in over Zoom or in a backyard, saying like, hey, what are your inspirations? Sharing our stories, sharing what type of stuff we want to do, and that's when it dawned on us that in 2 years the 100-year was going to be coming up, but. We would even go to Taco Bell in separate cars because we couldn't see each other, and we'd like go through the drive-through in our separate cars and then park beside each other and like roll down our windows and start dreaming up this short. When we landed on that we want to do a 100-year thing, we just go to Taco Bell and start doing our story jams in the parking lot.
we'd be having our dinner, and it's like we had Zoomed and stuff, but we missed each other, and so we wanted to, even though during COVID you couldn't get together, so we still stayed 6 feet apart, but we had our tacos and we talked about what this thing could eventually become.
And we're still waiting for that Taco Bell sponsor, but Taco Bell for life. Shout out if you're listening right now.
That's right, definitely.
But yeah, so like Dan said, nights, weekends, we were still finishing Zootopia Plus and Baymax at the time. Like Dan said, it's kind of reaching, trying to work with each other again. And so it was like Sunday nights or lunches, but Dan would text stuff, and then that would excite me, and I'd throw back an idea, and we'd go back and forth until finally we had something presentable to pitch. We had beat boards. Dan had done a lot of beat boards, and we had reference images and kind of like this idea to celebrate the 100-year. And in that pitch to Jennifer Lee was also that we want to bring back original voice actors, and that we want to do hand-drawn animation on paper, and that we want to bring animators out of retirement. That was all in the original pitch. So we kind of packaged this thing up together and got it on Zoom, and Dan started pitching.
It was fun reaching out to Jen and saying, hey, we have something we want to pitch you. And she was like, huh? You have something? What do you? Oh, okay. And so like they set up a time. She had no idea like that nobody knew that we were working on anything this whole time, obviously. And nobody was asking for an anniversary short on any level. So the whole 8 months that we were doing this and fantasizing about all these things that we wanted to do, in the back of our minds, we were like, this is going to be a colossal waste of time. Like this is as much fun as this is, and we're directing together, even though no one is asking us to.
We forced this relationship on the studio.
Exactly. So we well, Jen set us up initially. That's her fault.
True. Yeah, it's
But
her fault.
it just worked so well that we wanted to keep going. So yeah, I pitched through all the storyboards, and I had to sing to her at the end, and I just had to put yourself in a place of don't think about what you're doing, singing to the chief creative officer of Walt Disney Feature Animation. But when it was over, it was the ultimate. Well, we have talked about this so many times to each other about how we will never forget when, she said, I don't know how, but we have to figure out how to make this. And we knew we were, shooting for the stars because like Trent said, hand-drawn animation on paper, CG animation with live action plates. We were asking for hundreds and hundreds of characters. And how to juggle all of those pipelines and to bring back countless voice talents and all of those things. And everything that we pitched to Jennifer Lee, she was like, yep, let's do that. Yep, let's do that. Like 99.9% of it, every fantasy we had during those 8 months, I would say came true. And then some. Like there were fantasies that we didn't know we could have that came to the forefront. It's been amazing.
Well, and by the way, too, before she said that wonderful line of, I don't know how, but we need to make this, Dan finished the pitch, cut to black, and she just got up. It was on Zoom. She got up and left screen with no explanation. And it felt like, it was probably only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. And Dan and I were like,
we're looking at each other like, oh my God, what happened? Where did she go? What happened?
Yeah. And then she came back in and she had a Kleenex and her glasses were on her head. And she was wiping away tears, and she said, I don't know how, but we need to make this. We have to make this happen.
We couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. Still can't.
That's amazing.
Definitely celebrate that.
That's amazing. I mean, it's so brilliant. And I can just imagine what that pitch was like and the nerves building up to it, especially, like you said, that no one really determined that this was how they're going to go, but you put this brilliant thing together, which I really, and after seeing it, it's like, it just shows you how much these two guys understand and love the Walt Disney Company from top to bottom, because it's everything. It's really fantastic, right, Michelle?
Yeah, definitely. You, and I know I've heard you say this, that you wrote what you thought you'd want to see. And so I think that essence came through for everybody who watched it, because we are all fans, right? And so that we can appreciate your work because you wrote it that way. And so that's very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, if that means a lot. Thank you. If there were anything, I think we both wish it could even be just a little bit longer so that you could get more characters in there. And it kills me that there is still hundreds and hundreds of characters that we just, we had to be able to make this thing. And so even though Trent and I kept constantly throwing in more and more and more, our producers were like, you guys got to stop. You have to stop. Like, we're not going to finish. We're not going to get done. And it was so hard, though, because there's just so many great characters.
It turned into, after that pitch, to your point, Michelle, it turned into like just this wonderful organic process of creating the biggest Disney puzzle ever. I mean, we had in our story room, like you mentioned, it was just really Dan and I in there just coming up with jokes and gags and heart and charm and trying to find these character dynamics that would work together, and doing sketches and him drawing over it and just riffing off each other. And I think, to be honest, when we started this film, we thought, everyone's going to have a lot to say about which characters are in here and represented. And it turned out that for the most part, in fact, the entire time, it was really just Dan and I in the story room trying to figure out what works. And like you said, making the movie that we would want to see. And of course, the studio had story notes and pacing notes and and Jen had some great notes. But in terms of what characters and how we use them, that was just up to us, and we just had a blast like building this puzzle together.
It was pretty amazing that, when we did get the green light, we thought for sure, okay, here's where they come in and they're like, well, you make sure that Cinderella's wearing this dress and you make sure that this character has a line and you make sure that da 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 da. And they didn't do that at all. And both of us were like, wow, they're letting us take the notes that they give us that best support the idea, what we're trying to do. It was really amazing. When we did get the green light, Jen wanted me to pitch over Zoom again to the short to the entire studio. And so I sang to the whole studio, and that was
And
weird.
Hopefully
by
somebody
the way,
recorded that.
It is
I did.
actually recorded.
I did. I'll text you, Michelle. You know what?
I'm not a singer. I am not a singer.
And before that pitch, like minutes before the pitch was over Zoom, and Dan's like, "Okay, so I'll pitch the short, and then I'll turn my camera off and I'll sing." And I was like, "No, buddy, you keep your camera on. Let the people see." It probably pitching to about 1,000 people here on Zoom.
But I was like, but won't it be distracting if they seem in Trent's like, no, it's going to add like a personal touch and I'm like, okay. So, but after that initial pitch, the reaction from the people in the studio was just amazing. Everyone was reaching out to us saying, I got to be a part of this. These characters mean so much to me. And like the love and pride of the legacy and the artists that came before us and all of that was just like so overwhelming from everybody here in the building. Trent and I sent out an email to the studio and said, hey, send us your ideas, send us gag ideas. What character mashups would you like to see? Any idea,
or even what character you love or grew up with. Like we wanted to kind of know who people wanted to see. And it was kind of a telling email too, because we found out that everybody has a character for a specific nostalgia reason, and that it was so important for us to do our best to, of course, indicate all the features in Snow White, but shorts and other kind of side characters as well.
Yeah,
Right.
and when we would have people that would come on to the show, we would always say, okay, say your name, say the department that you're in, and who your favorite Disney character is. And boy, 9 times out of 10, that who's your favorite Disney character led to a sometimes emotional story about going to the theater with grandma back when, I was 6 years old or whatever it was, and what the genie meant to him or what Johnny Appleseed meant to her. So it was always so lovely to see how incredibly invested everyone was to quote unquote get it right in the end.
And that's how it's a good time to mention too. That's how we got our producers involved too. So Dan mentioned like obviously the complexities of all these characters and getting this up on screen. And that's when Dan pitched the short in December of 2021 in front of the studio. Unbeknownst to us, Brad and Yvette, our 2 producers, reached out to our studio leadership and said, we have to work on this short. So we got paired up with them pretty quickly and started trying to, with their huge experience and help, figuring out how to actually put this up on screen.
Neat. You brought up the genie, and I know both of you have shared with people how important that character was to each of you, how personally invested, I guess you were. And I know you did a lot, like you listened through a lot of dialogue that wasn't used in the film, and you reached out to the family estate. Tell us a little bit about that, because obviously the genie is a beloved character and there's sensitivity to that. So how did you all approach that, and what did it feel like?
Well, for starters, very early on when we first started talking about this and the characters, we both were like, well, the Olaf and the genie have to share a scene together, because we've heard, and the reason behind that is we've heard Josh Gad say that not only did Robin Williams inspire him to go into entertainment and comedy and acting, but that when he came in to do Olaf, that the genie was a big source of inspiration for him creating that character. So we knew we wanted to pair those 2 together. And we also, later on had access to Eric Goldberg, who was the original 2D supervisor of the Genie, and Hiram Osman, who's the original Olaf supervisor, who really helped me out on the first Frozen and took me under his wings. So it was like, we have all those elements there. We have to like create this scene together. And then Dan, this is a lot of Robin Williams takes you listen to, huh?
Yeah, I listened to 16 hours of footage of them recording Robin for Aladdin back in the early 90s, which was so much fun and fascinating to watch. And every time he would say something that I knew they didn't use in Aladdin because of my Disney nerd Rolodex in my head, I would write down the line and then the time code of where it is on the tape and think, okay, well, if he would say that, then maybe Olaf could say this and they could have this back and forth and stuff. So that's how it all, but yeah, the very first thing you do is reach out to the estate, make sure that they're on board. And when they saw what we were doing, they were so excited and they were like, yep, 100%, we got to do this. So it was great. It was so lovely. And showing Josh the storyboards here. Okay, here's Olaf with the genie. He was just so into it. He was so happy.
And what we found out then, Josh came in to record and we chatted with him afterwards. And he said, we knew that he looked up to Robin Williams and all this stuff, but then he started just telling us a story. He said when he lived in New York, and I think he was doing Book of Mormon at the time, on Broadway, and he lived downtown, and he would come home from late shows, and he lived in the same building as Robin Williams, and Robin would come in late too after shows or something. And he said once in a while they'd connect in a mail room or hallway lobby, and he said that Robin like put his hand on his shoulder once and said, we should work together someday. And they never got the chance to. So here we are now, Dan and I both in tears because we're like, there's an extra layer to this story of why this scene exists.
Wow.
All right, I wasn't prepared for that.
I know.
Isn't that like our chins were on the ground when he told us that. Like it was like, oh my goodness, like we had no idea that it was, so cool.
Oh, that's amazing. What an amazing story.
Yeah.
What an amazing thread to add to this brilliant short for sure. To see that scene, it's going to be even that much more impactful knowing that.
I know.
Like I don't cry enough when I watch this short now. I'm going to add that much more into it.
I can add one more impactful moment on the short because this is one of my favorite stories of working on the short is at the start of the scene, you see a character fly by in the background, and that's Robin from Disney World and from the short
Back to Neverland.
Back to Neverland, thank you.
Oh.
So that's kind of our only Disney Parks little cameo of a character, and we have that in there because when Dan and I sent out that email to the studio and said we'd love to hear who you want in here, one of our CG animators, Michael Woodside, sent in this drawing and a lovely message saying that he grew up in Orlando in Florida as a kid, and he would go at the time the Florida Animation Studio was working on Mulan and Lilo and Stitch, and he would go and there was the fishbowl and he could watch the animators and he'd be pressed up against the glass watching the animators. His mom would drop him off there, and that he watched this Back to Neverland hundreds of times every time he went there, and that this Robin character inspired him to be an animator. So he sent this letter in, and we're like, oh, let's get him in here since it's also Robin Williams.
Disney Animation animated him back in the day for that tour, so he's one of our characters. He's in our
he's in our cast. So we put him in that scene, and then we had Michael Woodside from the CG department animate that character in 2D and work with the team. So he got to live that little moment again, that childhood memory of how he got into animation.
Wow.
And he was saying that, boy, if you would tell 10-year-old Michael that the next time this character was going to be animated, it was going to be animated by him for the 100th anniversary short. And then he gets all emotional. There's a lot of emotions going on with this short, I'm telling you.
Oh.
Yeah. And then he also waited to show his family and his mom, who I know knows how much he loves that character. He didn't tell her he was doing that and showed her the short. Fresh, and I was like, okay, that's why we do these things. It's worth these stories for sure.
Oh man, that is beautiful. What a wonderful story.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I guess since we're talking about emotions already and they're already starting here, we might as well talk about that little pause in the middle that really, I think we've watched that short over a dozen times, and
minimal.
every time
No.
and especially the first time we saw it, like I was emotional all the way through it, but when that happened, I was a puddle. It was over. It was over for me. Of course, we're talking about that little spot in it where Mickey just takes that pause and sees the picture of Walt. And I want you guys to talk about this, but I need to mention that one of the things I really love about it, besides some of the things you've already discussed and we know about, is when Mickey approaches that picture, that there's the reflection of Mickey in it. And I got to think that was intentional, as that Mickey was a reflection of Walt at some point within it. So, but please tell us about the process behind making that, because it was the perfectly timed little emotional nod to Walt Disney within this wonderful, amazing, fun short.
That reflection. The reflection
Yeah.
specifically was taken from the Lillian Disney quote, where she would say Mickey was Walt and Walt was Mickey. And so we wanted to have them sort of on the same plane there, like that. Go ahead, Trent.
Well, I just want to set this up too, because I want to talk about Dan and say good things to him, because this was Dan boarded that moment. We knew we wanted a Walt and Mickey moment. We talked about it a lot, but Dan kind of had like a vision for what that moment would be, and just kind of like took it, and we talked about it a lot beforehand of what it could be, and how it could maybe overstay its welcome, and those are difficult moments in films, the emotional stuff, and Dan took it and wrote that little piece to it, and put it together.
It was tricky though, like it's Walt, it's Mickey talking to Walt, and if you have him say too much, it can get really schmaltzy. And if you don't give it enough, it can feel like not big enough of a moment. And so I'm like, man, this is going to be a tricky one. This is going to be a balancing act. But go ahead.
Yeah, and then we sent it to editorial, and we knew we wanted Feed the Birds in it. We had talked about that a lot because as Richard Sherman says, that was one of Walt's favorite songs, and he would play it for him on Friday afternoons in his office. And we knew this rich history of that song and Walt. And we're sitting there in edit, kind of like prepared with all the caveats, and the music comes on, that you hear the piano keys of Feed the Birds, and it plays. And Dan and I looked at each other like, that works. Like it just, so
Yeah.
I'm throwing this to Dan because it just like, I think he really just nailed it right away. And I got very emotional in that editorial session watching him play.
I thought I said to Trent early on, I'm like, this is going to be the scene that we rework and rework and rework until the very end, because to get it just right. And the first thing I wrote, and then by having that Feed the Birds under there and everything, and we just kind of looked at each other and our eyes were glassy, and we're like, oh my gosh, with that music, like it felt right. It got us. So we're like, well, if it got us, maybe it'll get other people too.
Boy, did it.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Yeah, Richard Sherman coming back to play in Walt's office, right?
Well, that was crazy, because when we had a temp track of Feed the Birds in editorial when we watched it, and then the head of our music department, we bumped into him in the hallways, Matt Walker, and he said, hey, I heard you got Feed the Birds peppered in there. And we're like, yeah, it seems to really be working. And then he's like, well, why don't we get Richard Sherman to play it for the short? And we're like, wait, what? And like Richard Sherman was 94 years old at the time. And he goes, yeah, and why don't we record it on the piano that he used to play for Walt in Walt's office? And we're like, don't throw these ideas out there if they might not happen, because this is an outstanding idea that you're throwing at us. So on a Friday afternoon, I called up Trent and I said, Trent, tuck in your shirt, wear a sport coat. We're meeting Richard Sherman. And we went up to Walt's office, and it looks exactly how he left it back in the day. There's the exact same piano right there in his office, just like it's always been. And Richard Sherman comes in and he's playing Spoonful of Sugar, and he's going to town, like, and then when he starts playing Feed the Birds and just, oh my gosh. And then to have it for this, I mean, in those 8 months that we were fantasizing. We didn't know we could dream that big. So that was just one of the best days of my life, quite frankly. It was amazing.
Oh, it was amazing. And you couldn't tear Richard off the piano. I mean, he just wanted to keep playing at 94. And my memory of that day too is when he walked into Walt's office, there's probably about 20 people there, the film crew, production people, us, all the people. And he, like, such a gentleman. He went and like shook everybody's hand and he's like, "Hello, I'm Richard Sherman," like had to introduce himself. And I was like, he was such a sweet guy. And then we got to show him the final short for his 95th birthday. Which was so special.
Man.
A year later.
Okay, we're going to cry even more when we watch that scene again. Thank you very much.
No, and that scene, like, I know I mentioned Eric Goldberg earlier, but he, right away was like, I need to animate those scenes. And Eric came in and just like, I just think it's so beautiful what he did. The acting is just so incredible with Eric's Mickey animation.
Nice.
Nice. There's a couple extras on Disney Plus if you haven't seen them that are so there's a Richard Sherman bit on there.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
We were lucky enough. You showed us the Richard Sherman one at Destination D23, and we were already taken aback by it. Then it came out on Disney Plus, and it was like, oh, where's the Richard Sherman thing? And we're like, oh no, it's not there. But eventually, you guys put it up, or Disney put it up.
It's up there now. It's in the extras.
Yeah.
That was pretty mind-blowing, wasn't it? At D23 to like, it adds a layer. It adds a layer.
Yes, totally. So I know for a fact that you two, because you've posted it, that you've each actually all hands in, as you said, you were doing animation for this feature and cleanup. What was it like? And like, how is that dynamic that you decide what work you're going to actually put into it, as well as obviously creating and directing, et cetera?
Well, it's one of the fun parts about shorts. Like, Dan and I have worked on a bunch of shorts now, and it's kind of like a little different than our features, that it's sometimes all hands on deck and you can jump around departments a little bit. And I was a CG animator at Disney for I guess 8 or 9 years, and I did 2D before, not at a Disney level by any means, but I did some 2D and I've kept it up here a little bit. And me volunteering to animate was basically so that we don't cut characters. I mean, we were going to lose characters, and I was like, no, I'll do the penguin. Like, I can jump in and do that, or I'll do Ichabod. And it was really just like jumping in as we kind of like got through the story stuff, and we're going into production, saying, how can we help? And we just Dan and I wanted to spend our days, nights, weekends working on this thing.
We did. This was the first job I've ever had in my life where we're like, on Fridays, we'd be like, oh man, we have to go home for 2 days. Like, we were kids.
Dan, hang on. Dan would text me on Sundays and be like, I can't wait for tomorrow. I'm like, nobody's that excited for Monday. Come on.
But we were kids in candy stores. Like, we storyboarded the whole thing ourselves. And then to get to write it, and then Trent doing hand-drawn animation, I got to jump in and do cleanup animation, final line, which I haven't done in 20 years. But I was, they brought an animation table into my office, and man, flipping the paper and getting to draw Ichabod Crane while I'm listening to Bing Crosby sing about Ichabod Crane, and I was in heaven. I got to do scratch recording for all the male characters throughout, and man, that's fun. Just trying to do your best Merlin, and then your best Mickey, and then your best we couldn't get enough. We just wanted to go on and on and on. So what a joy. And the crew was just so invested and so excited, and it was inspiring, and it just fueled us, to want to make the best it could be, obviously.
Yeah, to watch our 2D pipeline here, work and have 2D effects, and the whole team. Some people hadn't done it for a while. Some people had switched over to CG and came back to 2D and hadn't done it in a while. Some people, like Michael Woodside or Jorge Ruiz, were doing like 2D at Disney for the first time. So it was a lot of just really passionate people wanting to get their hands on the short, and we felt the same way. So we couldn't sit there and watch. We're like, let us come play too.
Yeah. So Dan, I know that you kept a journal of this journey that you all went, and so that's got to be something one.
He's
Oh,
he's actually going to read
nice.
it.
Showing us the journal right
He's
now.
going to read it. He's going to read it for you right now. This is a
Nice.
6-hour podcast, right? We have time.
Maybe that could be part of your trilogy.
That's the director's cut there. You know?
Oh yeah, there you go. Oh, that would be good. But yeah, that must be something to reflect and go back and look at and see what comes to mind as some of the most memorable days in that you've captured.
Oh my gosh. The support of the studio, the ongoing support of an enthusiasm, the unbridled enthusiasm about what we were doing. It was infectious, and it fueled us to just keep going, and everyone was like, this is so special. People kept telling us just how special it was, and so it's okay, I get, because when you're in it, a lot of times you're so close to it, you need fresh eyes and all of that stuff. But I mean, recording so many of those, our heroes, Paige O'Hara and Richard White, and my God, Timon, Nathan Lane as Timon, and Jeremy Irons as Scar, and Tom Hulce as Quasimodo, like Judy Kuhn, Pocahontas, to get her to sing and to hear, like, it was, what a joy. And each one of them would come in for like one line, bring in Mandy Moore. She comes in for one line, everybody. And 9 times out of 10, they all had a story, or they had so many memories about when they recorded that character for their film and what that has meant to their life. And how, like Richard White, the voice of Gaston, said, he goes, that is being Gaston has been the ultimate gift for him in his life. He has then gone on to children's hospitals, and he does the voices for kids. And, we sort of think of these characters as gifts for us. And here, all of these people were talking about what a gift it was for them. And it's just like to hear, and they knew the animators that animated their character, and they knew like little special little details about, the process of what that character went through and different things. And it was just so cool to see how passionate and excited they were about their part in the whole Disney canon,
And by the way, too, Dan, I knew Dan was keeping a journal, so I didn't have to. He was doing all the writing. But Dan once in a while reads me little pages. He might do this today. And one that stands out to me just a couple months ago now was Dan just came to me and he's like, "We recorded Bernie. I know we haven't talked about Bernie yet, but we recorded Bernie Mattinson a year ago today." And those little memories, I mean, were just astonishing. That day of shooting with Bernie was just a very special day.
Yeah, for sure. For
Oh,
sure.
let's
go ahead.
Let's go ahead and talk about Bernie a little bit here. I mean, the fact that you got him in there, not only got him in, but leading it off. And I think that I was an emotional wreck at Destination D23 after seeing the show, so forgive me. But I think that you mentioned that he was there, obviously 70 years with the Walt Disney Company, and then with him was an intern. So you were kind of looking at it as, the oldest member and maybe one of the newest members of kind of the entire lifespan of Disney animation in that one little scene there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. From the very first, when I storyboard, I start with frame 1 and then I just go forward. There's some story artists that like they can see a specific moment in their head, so they'll jump to that and then they'll fill in the other parts around it and stuff. But I have to start with frame 1, drawing 1. And my very, very first drawing is Bernie Mattinson is walking out of the animation studio with a young intern. And this was months and months and months before we had asked Bernie if he wanted to do it, if he had no idea any of that stuff. So but Bernie had to be in it, working at the studio for just shy of 70 years. His first movie was Lady and the Tramp. His last movie was Strange World, which just came out last year. And director of Mickey's Christmas Carol. He did everything. And a sweetheart of a guy. So we definitely wanted like sort of the old guard and the new, we keep moving forward, and And it's all about the people and the artists. And we were in an effort to pay tribute to the hundreds and hundreds of people that have worked at the studio. We thought, Bernie and then an intern seemed to sort of make the most sense.
Yeah, and in those boards, Dan actually drew him in like the outfit that you see, like they were so detailed. We're like, gosh, we hope he says yes, and he did. And we always talk about Bernie because he is the connection with. He met Walt. He worked with Walt. He's a connection to the Nine Old Men and worked on films like Sleeping Beauty and Lady and the Tramp. So it's pretty amazing that deep dive. And there's a great behind the scenes piece on Disney Plus now too. The one you saw at D23 is up there now too.
And yeah, I mean, Bernie, he was here, he was working, he had his office, like he was 86 years old and his office was just down the hall here from mine. So we did lose him this past February, but when we recorded him in September, yeah, we thought we were so excited about premiere of this short and about just rolling out that red carpet for him and just treating him like the superstar that he is. And I'm sad that never got to happen, but man, it's cool that everybody seems to know who he is now. That is so cool.
Definitely Disney legend. He's the man. And so glad you got to play it. And by the way, you guys made a little cameo in the short right there before that, kind of opening the door for him or holding the door for them. So if you want to look for Dan and Trent right there at the beginning of that short, you'll see them just kind of walking out. Not really looking at the camera, but they're just kind of there.
We're leaving for the day like everybody else. So
yeah, that's right. We're excited to get back to work on the next day, right?
Totally not an actor. I ruined one of Bernie's perfect takes by staring at the camera as I held the door for him. I had to apologize, and Bernie, like a true champ, did it one more time for us.
Funny. So you did all this work. You put all this together. It's amazing. I know you showcased it once before. We got to see it at Destination D23. But I think that was probably your first time really putting it in front of or maybe some of the biggest Disney fans you'll find out there. You had to be a little nervous, I would imagine, putting that out there then. But the response you got, extended standing ovation. How did that feel for you guys?
Oh, it was so good to be out there for that. We were so happy to get invited and to go there. And there were nerves backstage, of course, because you spend 2 years working on these things, just thinking like when you're in the story room or in Anim Dailies, gosh, I hope people watching this enjoy it as much as we had making it, right? That's like, as filmmakers, if they have half the fun we had, then we did our job. But there's always that little bit of nerves that's like, what if they don't laugh?
And I got to say, with this particular short, like we're diving into hundreds and hundreds of characters, and as Disney fans, they have ownership of these characters. They mean something. They're family to people. People have tattoos of them on their body. And if we misrepresent their friends and family, basically, we're going to hear about it, right? And so our goal was to do it right and make the characters look and sound exactly how you remember them. That was the goal. And we have such love in our hearts for the characters and the people that created them that we're like, well, hopefully this shines through. But then it's like, well, somebody in their mind, they might think, well, so-and-so isn't that blue or whatever, right. Who knows what it is. But we tried to, do our very, very best to reintroduce the fans and to their friends and family, because that's, so.
And that's, and when people connect with that, it for us, I think it makes us think of our team, because we had it goes down to like Dan said, it could just be a color palette thing. And we had the team working on finding the archive stuff of the perfect colors, the line quality, the cleanup, whether it's like the 60s kind of scratchy cleanup line or the kind of beautiful Sleeping Beauty or the Aladdin thick and thins. Our team here was so dedicated to making sure that every choice made it feel like those characters jumped out of those movies from that time frame.
Very cool. Well, we know we're getting kind of at the end of the time of your availability. But I do have one more question that I know there's a lot of Easter eggs throughout the short that are amazing. What was one of the most memorable to you or just connected you personally with the film?
Oh, well, okay. I'll throw out there really quickly first. There's literally hundreds of Easter eggs and stories behind every shot. One that I haven't seen the internet pick out yet is the shot of the Dalmatians looking at Chernobog from Night on Bald Mountain. There's shelves around the TV, and on the shelves there's a couple Easter eggs there. And we had the Disney Archives team bring over the snow globe from Mary Poppins, the original snow globe, and bring it over, with gloves in a special box. Nobody could touch it. And and that was just like, I know we had the penguin from Mary Poppins, but it was really fun to have that original snow globe. So that's sitting on the shelf to the right of the TV.
Wow. Definitely have to watch.
I'm gonna have to look for that.
Yes.
So many things. I can't wait. I watched it so many times and I can't wait to watch it again. Guys, we could talk to you forever about this short. I mean,
Yeah,
really,
we need to bring you back.
we love it so much. Ever since we saw it, we were afraid we were talking it up too much before people actually got to see it. Like, did we loved it? It was great, right? It was great. I think there's one thing about there in the community, and in the planet in general, but especially in the Disney community, there's, some people love things, some people don't love things, This was the one thing that I think really united the Disney community. Everybody loved this short. And it's a testament to you two for putting it all together, doing such a great job and such great work. So from all us Disney fans, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for putting this together. It was brilliant, wonderful, beautiful. Thank you so much.
That means so much.
Yeah, you really don't know how much that means to us. I mean, that's everything. Thank you very, very much.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show. We both do, for you coming on the show and talking with us. And I think that there's, you did Once Upon a Snowman. You now have done Once Upon a Studio. I think we need to wrap up this trilogy with maybe Once Upon an Oscars, possibly. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, maybe some Once Upon tattoos on her back too. I think.
I like it. Guys, thank you so much, Michelle.
Oh yeah, we appreciate the work that you did. It is an amazing masterpiece that you put together that is such an honorable way to pay homage to the rich history of the studio, to the 100th anniversary. And from a personal perspective, we couldn't be more thrilled that you all joined us. We're fangirls, and we're just we're really appreciative of your time and sharing these wonderful stories with us.
Anytime. With the making this thing story after story after story. I mean, we've just begun to touch on some of the things,
this could be our first trilogy, right? We'll just
there you go.
episode 1 of this trilogy.
No, it's our pleasure.
You have a great podcast, and you're both so lovely to talk to. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. You're the lovely one.
Appreciate that. That means a lot to us, for sure.
Thanks again. Dan Abraham, Trent Correy, the co-creators, the co-directors of Once Upon a Studio. Thank you again for being on the Hyperion Adventures podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.